My name is Samuel Morrison, and I've been farming this harsh stretch of Arizona territory for the better part of 15 years. It's 1887, and out here in the desert, a man learns quickly that survival depends on hard work, careful planning, and sometimes pure luck. What I never expected was that the most important decision of my life would come in the form of a small, frightened child appearing at my doorstep on a scorching July afternoon. The land I call home sits about 30 miles northeast of Tucson, in a valley that most folks would consider God-forsaken. The soil is stubborn, the water scarce, and the nearest neighbor is a 2-day ride away. But I've managed to coax life from this desert, growing enough corn, beans, and squash to sustain myself and even trade surplus for supplies in town. My small ranch house, built from adobe bricks I made myself, sits beside a precious well that never runs dry. The main reason I chose this particular spot: I came west after the war between the states, like many men seeking a fresh start, far from the memories of battlefields and lost friends. The frontier promised opportunity for those willing to work for it, and I was certainly willing. Over the years, I'd built a modest but sustainable life: a sturdy house, a barn for my 2 horses, and handful of cattle, chicken coops, and carefully tended fields that provided everything I needed. The relationship between white settlers and the Apache in this region was complicated, to say the least. Most of my neighbors lived in constant fear of raids, keeping rifles close and traveling in groups. The Apache had been fighting to protect their ancestral lands for decades, and tensions had only grown worse since the government's attempts to force them onto reservations. I'd heard countless stories of attacks, kidnappings, and brutal conflicts that left both sides scarred. But I'd always tried to take a different approach. When I occasionally encountered Apache hunters or travelers near my land, I offered water and sometimes food, treating them as I would any traveler in need. Most passed by peacefully, and a few had even helped me track down stray cattle in exchange for a meal. I believed that respect and kindness could bridge the gap between our peoples, though I knew many considered me naive for thinking so. That particular July day started like any other. I'd risen before dawn to tend to my animals and check the irrigation channels that carried precious water from my well to the crops. The desert heat was already building by mid-morning, promising another scorching day where any sensible person would seek shade during the afternoon hours. I was repairing a section of fence damaged by a recent dust storm when I heard it, a sound that made me freeze with my hammer halfway to the nail. It was crying, soft and muffled, but unmistakably human, and it was coming from the direction of my house. Setting down my tools, I walked carefully toward the sound, my hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on my hip. In this territory, unexpected visitors could mean trouble, and I'd learned to be cautious, but as I rounded the corner of my house, what I saw made me stop in my tracks. Huddled against the shaded side of my adobe wall was a child, a small figure covered in dirt and dust, with long black hair matted and tangled. The child couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, and was clearly exhausted and frightened. As I approached slowly, I could see that this was an Apache child, dressed in traditional clothing that was now torn and stained. The little one looked up at me with large, dark eyes filled with fear and desperation. There were tear tracks through the dirt on the small face, and I could see that the child was trembling, whether from fear, exhaustion, or both. My heart immediately went out to this small, vulnerable person who had somehow found their way to my isolated homestead. "Easy there, little one," I said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you." The child didn't respond, but didn't try to run either. I could see now that it was a girl, and she was in desperate need of food, water, and care. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, and her small frame suggested she hadn't eaten properly in days. I stood slowly and went to my well, drawing up a bucket of cool water. Returning with a tin cup, I offered it to her, making drinking motions to show my intent. She hesitated for a long moment, studying my face, before accepting the cup with shaking hands and drinking deeply. "That's it," I encouraged gently. "Drink as much as you need." While she drank, I tried to piece together how she might have come to be here. Apache children didn't simply wander alone across the desert. Something terrible must have happened. Perhaps her family had been attacked, or she'd become separated during a forced relocation to one of the reservations. The possibilities were all heartbreaking. After she'd finished the water, I gestured toward my house. "Come inside where it's cooler. I'll get you some food." She hesitated again, clearly torn between need and fear. I could only imagine what stories she'd heard about white settlers, just as I'd heard stories about the Apache. But hunger and thirst won out, and she followed me inside, staying close to the door as if ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. My house was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and a small bedroom. I kept it clean and well organized, habits learned from my mother back in Ohio. I gestured for the girl to sit at my wooden table while I prepared some food. I heated up leftover stew from the night before, cut some fresh bread, and poured a glass of milk from my cow. The child watched my every movement with wary eyes, but when I placed the food before her, she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in far too long. While she ate, I studied her more carefully. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, I could see that she was a beautiful child with intelligent eyes and delicate features. Her traditional Apache dress, though damaged, was well made, suggesting she came from a family of some standing within her tribe. "What's your name?" I asked gently, though I didn't expect an answer. She looked up at me, but remained silent. I pointed to myself. "Samuel," I said clearly. Then I pointed to her with a questioning expression. After a long moment, she whispered something so softly, I almost missed it. It sounded like Aiyana, but I wasn't certain. "Aiyana," I repeated, and she nodded slightly. It was a start. Over the next few hours, I tried to make her feel safe and comfortable. I prepared a bath for her, providing clean clothes, an old shirt of mine that would serve as a dress for someone her size. I showed her where she could sleep, offering my own bed while I would take the floor. But the most important decision came that evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the desert mountains. I knew that harboring an Apache child could be seen as treason by some of my fellow settlers. If word got out, I could face serious consequences. The territorial authorities might arrest me, my neighbors might turn against me, and I could lose everything I'd worked to build. Yet, as I looked at this small, vulnerable child who had somehow found her way to my door, I knew there was only one choice I could make. Whatever had happened to her family, whatever dangers she faced, I couldn't turn her away. She was just a child in need, and I had the means to help her. That night, as Aiyana slept in my bed and I lay on blankets by the fireplace, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I would care for her, protect her, and help her heal from whatever trauma had brought her to my door. I didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but I knew it was the right thing to do. What I couldn't have imagined was that this simple act of compassion would soon bring unexpected visitors to my door, visitors who would transform my understanding of the Apache people and forge bonds of friendship that would last a lifetime. The child I'd sheltered would prove to be far more important than I'd realized, and my small act of kindness would be repaid in ways I never could have anticipated. As I drifted off to sleep that first night, listening to the desert wind and the soft breathing of the child in the next room, I had no idea that within a week, my isolated homestead would become the center of a remarkable story of trust, friendship, and the power of human compassion to bridge even the deepest divides. The first few days with Aiyana were a delicate dance of patience and understanding. She remained skittish, jumping at sudden sounds and watching me with the wariness of a wild animal that had been hurt by humans before. But gradually, as I continued to show her nothing but kindness, she began to relax and trust me. Communication was our biggest challenge initially. Aiyana spoke very little English, and I knew no Apache words beyond a few basic terms I'd picked up from occasional encounters. But necessity and kindness have a way of creating their own language. Through gestures, drawings in the dirt, and simple words repeated patiently, we began to understand each other. On the second morning, I woke to find her already up, sitting by the window and watching the sunrise. She had braided her hair and was wearing the makeshift dress I'd provided, though she'd also wrapped herself in a colorful blanket from my bedroom. There was something both vulnerable and dignified about her posture that reminded me she came from a proud people with their own rich culture. "Good morning, Aiyana," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned and gave me the first real smile I'd seen from her, small and hesitant, but genuine. "Good morning," she repeated carefully, the English words unfamiliar on her tongue. That became our first lesson. As I went about my morning chores, I named everything I touched, speaking slowly and clearly. "Water," I'd say, pointing to the well. "Horse," when I fed my animals. "Corn," As I checked my crops, Aiyana followed me like a shadow, repeating the words and pointing to objects herself, asking questions with her eyes that I tried my best to answer. By the third day, she was helping with simple tasks around the homestead. She had an intuitive understanding of animals and was soon helping me feed the chickens and collect eggs. She watched with fascination as I milked my cow, and when I offered to teach her, she learned quickly, her small hands surprisingly strong and sure. It was during these quiet moments of shared work that I began to piece together fragments of her story. Through her broken English and my patient questions, I learned that her family had been traveling when soldiers came. There had been shooting, running, and chaos. She had hidden as her parents told her to, but when she emerged, everyone was gone. The pain in her young eyes when she spoke of this was heartbreaking. I could only imagine the terror and confusion she must have felt. Alone in the vast desert, with no idea where to go or what had happened to her loved ones. Somehow, she had wandered for days before finding my homestead, guided perhaps by the smoke from my chimney or the green of my irrigated fields visible from miles away in this barren landscape. I did my best to comfort her, though words seemed inadequate for such loss. Instead, I tried to show through my actions that she was safe, that she belonged here for as long as she needed. I carved small toys for her from scraps of wood, taught her simple card games in the evenings, and shared stories of my own childhood back in Ohio. Gradually, she began to share stories of her own people, with her limited English supplemented by expressive gestures. She told me about Apache traditions, about the importance of family and community, about their deep connection to the land. She taught me a few words in her language. She for son Shadizi for younger sister, and Ahihi for thank you, which she said often. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky, Aiyana suddenly became very serious. She pointed to herself, then to me, then made a gesture that encompassed the homestead, family. She asked in her careful English. The simple question hit me harder than I expected. This child, who had lost everything, was asking if we could be family. I felt a lump form in my throat as I nodded. Yes, I said firmly. Family. She smiled then, the brightest smile I'd seen from her yet, and leaned against my shoulder as we continued to watch the stars. In that moment, I realized that she had given me something I hadn't even known I was missing. A sense of purpose beyond mere survival, a connection to another human being that made the isolation of frontier life bearable. But even as we grew closer, I couldn't shake my worry about what would happen when the outside world inevitably intruded on our peaceful existence. I knew that Aiyana's people would be looking for her, just as I knew that the territorial authorities would not look kindly on a white settler harboring an Apache child. Every day that passed increased the likelihood that someone would come looking. The question was, who would arrive first, and with what intentions? I had been preparing for various scenarios, cleaning and checking my rifles, making sure I had adequate supplies, and even considering what escape routes might be available if we needed to flee quickly. But I was just one man, and if a large force decided to take Aiyana by force, there would be little I could do to stop them. It was on the 6th day that my concerns proved justified, though not in the way I had expected. I was working in my cornfield that morning, with Aiyana helping me weed between the rows, when she suddenly froze and cocked her head, listening intently to something I couldn't hear. Her expression changed from contentment to alert attention, and she stood slowly, scanning the horizon. "What is it?" I asked, following her gaze but seeing nothing unusual. She said something in Apache, then switched to English. "People come, many people." My heart began to race. I strained my ears and finally caught what her sharper senses had detected first, the distant sound of horses and voices carrying across the desert air. A lot of horses, by the sound of it. "Apache?" I asked. She nodded, her expression unreadable. I couldn't tell if she was frightened, excited, or simply resigned to whatever was coming. "We should go to the house," I said, taking her hand, but she shook her head and stood her ground, straightening her small shoulders in a gesture of dignity that reminded me again of her proud heritage. "No hide," she said firmly. "They come for Aiyana." As the sounds grew closer, I could make out individual voices and the rhythmic sound of many horses moving at a steady pace. Whatever was coming, it was organized and purposeful. I checked that my revolver was secure in its holster, though I prayed I wouldn't need to use it. Then, cresting the low ridge to the east of my homestead, they appeared, It was a sight that would have struck terror into the heart of most frontier settlers, a large group of Apache warriors on horseback, their faces painted for war, weapons clearly visible. I counted quickly and estimated at least 30 or 40 riders, more Apache than I had ever seen in one place. But as they drew closer, I noticed something that didn't fit the typical raid scenario. They were moving slowly and deliberately, not with the speed and aggression of an attack. Many carried bundles and packs that suggested travel rather than warfare, and most importantly, Aiyana showed no fear instead. She was scanning the approaching group with growing excitement. Suddenly, she cried out in Apache and began running toward the approaching riders. My heart leaped into my throat as I imagined her being trampled, but the lead riders immediately slowed and one man dismounted, catching her in his arms as she reached him. The reunion was emotional and intense. Aiyana was crying and speaking rapidly in Apache while the man, clearly a relative by his reaction, held her tightly and responded in their language. Other riders had dismounted and were gathering around, all talking at once. I stood frozen in my cornfield, uncertain whether to approach or retreat to my house for the rifle. These were clearly Aiyana's people, come to reclaim her, but I had no idea what their intentions were toward me. I had heard too many stories of Apache justice to be entirely comfortable, even though I had done nothing but help the child. After several minutes of intense conversation, the man holding Aiyana looked up and spotted me standing uncertainly in my field. He said something to the others, then began walking toward me, still carrying Aiyana, with several other warriors flanking him. As they approached, I could see that the man was older, perhaps in his 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His face was weathered and stern, but his eyes, so similar to Aiyana's, held intelligence and dignity. This was clearly a leader among his people. When they reached me, Aiyana wiggled down from the man's arms and ran to my side, taking my hand in a gesture that clearly indicated her allegiance and affection. She spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing between me and the man, obviously explaining something important. The man studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes taking in everything, my appearance, my posture, the way Aiyana clung to my hand. Then, to my surprise, he spoke in clear, accented English. "You are the one who found my granddaughter." Granddaughter. That explained the strong resemblance and the emotional reunion. I nodded, finding my voice. "Yes, sir. She came to my door 6 days ago, hungry and frightened. I've been caring for her." He continued to study me, and I felt as though I was being weighed and measured by someone who had spent a lifetime judging the character of men. The other warriors remained silent but alert, clearly ready to act on their leader's command. "She tells me you have been kind to her, that you fed her, clothed her, treated her as family. She's a good child," I replied simply. Any decent person would have done the same. Something shifted in his expression at those words. The stern mask softened slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the relief and gratitude he was trying to hide behind his dignified composure. "I am Chief Running Bear," he said formally. "Aiyana is the daughter of my son, who was killed by soldiers 1 week ago, along with her mother and brother. She is all that remains of his family." The weight of that statement hit me like a physical blow. This child had lost not just her parents, but her entire immediate family in what was clearly a military action. The fact that she had survived at all was miraculous. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, meaning it deeply. "She's been through terrible trauma, but she's strong. She's been helping me around the homestead and learning English. She's been like family to me too." Chief Running Bear nodded slowly, then said something in Apache to the other warriors. Several of them moved away, beginning to unpack the bundles they had brought. I watched in amazement as they began unloading what appeared to be gifts, furs, food, crafted items, and other goods. "You showed kindness to our child when you could have turned her away," the chief said. "You risked danger to yourself to care for one of our people. This is not forgotten." As I watched the Apache warriors arranging their gifts near my house, I realized that this moment was about to change everything. These people had not come as enemies, but as friends. They had come to honor a debt of gratitude and to forge a connection that would transform my understanding of their culture and my place in this harsh frontier landscape. The next few hours would prove to be among the most remarkable of my life, as I was welcomed into a circle of friendship and respect that few white settlers had ever experienced. The child I had sheltered had indeed brought unexpected visitors to my door, visitors who would teach me that the bonds of human kindness, transcend all boundaries of race, culture, and language. What followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my 15 years on the frontier. As the Apache warriors continued to unload their packs, I realized that this was not merely a retrieval mission. It was a formal ceremony of gratitude and respect that spoke to the deep cultural values of these remarkable people. Chief Running Bear gestured for me to sit on a blanket that had been spread near my house, while Aiyana settled beside me, clearly serving as a bridge between two worlds. The other warriors arranged themselves in a circle, and I found myself at the center of what was obviously an important tribal gathering. Samuel Morrison, the chief said, using my full name with a formality that surprised me. "You have shown honor to our people in our tradition. Such kindness must be acknowledged and repaid." One by one, warriors began presenting gifts. The first was a magnificent buffalo hide, tanned to incredible softness and decorated with intricate beadwork that must have taken months to complete. The warrior who presented it spoke in Apache, and Chief Running Bear translated. He says, "This hide will keep you warm through many winters, as you kept our child warm when she was cold and afraid." Next came furs of various animals, fox, rabbit, and deer, all perfectly prepared and of the highest quality. Then came food, dried meat that would last for months, corn that had been specially prepared, and various roots and plants that I didn't recognize but which Chief Running Bear explained were both nutritious and medicinal. "These plants will help you if you become sick," he explained. "Our medicine women have prepared them with great care." But the gifts weren't just practical items. There were beautiful crafted pieces as well. A knife with an intricately carved handle, a pair of moccasins that fit my feet perfectly, somehow they had estimated my size correctly, and a stunning necklace made from turquoise and silver that clearly held significant cultural meaning as each gift was presented. The giver would speak briefly in Apache, and Chief Running Bear would translate the sentiment. Each warrior expressed gratitude, not just for my care of Aiyana, but for treating her with the dignity and respect due to a member of their tribe. "You did not see Apache child," one warrior's message was translated. "You saw only child in need. This shows good heart." The ceremony continued for over an hour, and by the end, I was surrounded by more valuable goods than I could have purchased with a year's income from my farming. But more valuable than the material gifts was the clear message being conveyed. I was being accepted as a friend and ally by people who had every reason to distrust white settlers. When the gift-giving concluded, Chief Running Bear stood and addressed me directly. "Samuel Morrison, you have shown that not all white men are enemies of the Apache. You have proven that kindness exists in your heart, and that you judge people by their character, not by their skin or their tribe." He paused, looking around at his warriors, then continued, "We offer you something more valuable than these gifts. We offer you our friendship and our protection. You will always be welcome among our people, and any Apache who meets you will know that you are a friend too. Be trusted and respected." The significance of this offer was not lost on me. In a territory where conflicts between Apache and white settlers were common and often deadly, I was being granted safe passage and protection by one of the most powerful chiefs in the region. It was an honor that few white men had ever received. But Chief Running Bear wasn't finished. "There is more. My granddaughter has told me of the kindness you have shown her, but also of the loneliness she sees in your life. A man should not live alone in this harsh land. We invite you to visit our winter camp, to learn our ways as we would learn yours. Perhaps together we can build understanding between our peoples." I was overwhelmed by the generosity and trust being shown to me. "Chief Running Bear, I am deeply honored by your offer. I would be proud to visit your camp and learn from your people." Aiyana, who had been listening intently to the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up in her mixture of Apache and English. She was clearly asking her grandfather something important, and their conversation continued for several minutes. Finally, Chief Running Bear turned back to me with what might have been the hint of a smile. "My granddaughter has made a request. She asks if she might stay with you for a while longer, to continue learning the white man's ways and language. She says you have become family to her, and she does not wish to leave you alone." I looked at Aiyana, this remarkable child who had already given me so much, and felt my heart swell with affection and gratitude. "If it's acceptable to you and your people, I would be honored to continue caring for her. She has brought joy to my life that I didn't know I was missing." "It is decided then," Chief Running Bear said. "Aiyana will stay with you, but she will not be alone. We will visit regularly, and you will both be welcome in our camp whenever you wish to come." As the afternoon progressed, the formal ceremony gave way to more relaxed interaction. Some of the younger warriors were curious about my farming methods and asked to see my irrigation system. They were impressed by the way I had managed to make the desert bloom, and several offered suggestions based on their own knowledge of desert agriculture. Others were interested in my animals. Particularly, my horses Apache were renowned horsemen, and they examined my stock with the expert eyes of people who understood the value of good breeding and training. To my surprise, they complimented my choices and care of the animals. As the evening approached, Chief Running Bear made an announcement that surprised me further. "We will camp here tonight, if you permit it. Tomorrow, some of our people will help you with work that is too much for one man alone." I readily agreed, and soon my small homestead was transformed into a bustling Apache camp. Fires were lit, food was prepared, and the sound of conversation and laughter filled the air. For the first time since I'd arrived in Arizona, my isolated ranch felt like a community. That evening, as we shared a meal around the fire, I learned more about Apache culture than I had in all my previous years on the frontier. Chief Running Bear and several of the older warriors told stories of their people's history, their connection to the land, and their struggles to maintain their way of life in the face of increasing pressure from the US government. In return, I shared stories of my own background, my reasons for coming west, and my experiences as a farmer in this challenging environment. The conversation was facilitated by several Apache who spoke good English, and gradually I began to understand that these people were far more complex and sophisticated than the savage stereotypes. I had heard Aiyana served as a constant translator and bridge between the two groups, clearly delighted to be reunited with her people, while also proud to show them the new skills and knowledge she had gained during her stay with me. Her resilience and adaptability were remarkable, and I could see that she was destined to play an important role in building understanding between our peoples. As the night wore on and the fire burned low, Chief Running Bear pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Samuel Morrison," he said quietly, "what happened to my granddaughter's family was part of a larger tragedy. The soldiers who killed them were pursuing our people to force us onto the reservation. Many families have been broken, many children orphaned." He paused, staring into the dying fire. "But your kindness to one lost child has shown me that there may be hope for peace between our peoples. If more white men had hearts like yours, perhaps we could find a way to share this land without bloodshed." "I believe that's possible, Chief," I replied. "People are people, regardless of their background. We all want the same basic things: safety for our families, food on our tables, and the freedom to live according to our beliefs." "Yes," he agreed, "and perhaps, through friendship like ours, we can teach others this truth." The next morning brought a flurry of activity as the Apache warriors made good on their promise to help with my work. Some repaired sections of my irrigation system that I had been struggling with alone. Others helped me harvest corn that was ready and repair damage to my barn from recent storms. But the most valuable assistance came in the form of knowledge. The Apache taught me desert survival techniques that could save my life, showed me which plants were edible or medicinal, and shared water location secrets that could be crucial during dry periods. In return, I shared my farming techniques, showed them how to preserve food using methods I had learned back east, and demonstrated some basic mechanical repairs that could be useful for their tools and weapons. When it came time for them to leave, the parting was bittersweet. I had grown fond of these remarkable people and would miss their company. But I knew this was not goodbye. It was the beginning of a friendship that would last for years to come. Chief Running Bear clasped my hand in the white man's fashion, then embraced me in the Apache way. "You will always be welcome among our people, Samuel Morrison, and we will always be your friends." As I watched the Apache riders disappear over the ridge, with Aiyana waving goodbye to her grandfather and cousins, I reflected on the remarkable week that had just passed. A simple act of kindness toward a lost child had opened doors to friendship and understanding that I never could have imagined. Over the following months and years, that friendship would prove to be one of the most valuable things in my life. The Apache would visit regularly, bringing news, trade goods, and companionship. I would visit their camps, learning their ways and serving as an unofficial ambassador between their people and the few white settlers willing to listen. Aiyana would grow up bilingual and bicultural, serving as a bridge between two worlds and helping to foster understanding wherever she went. She would eventually become a teacher and translator, playing a crucial role in peace negotiations between the Apache and the territorial government. But it all began with a simple choice: to show kindness to a frightened child who appeared at my door. That choice taught me that the greatest gifts in life often come from the most unexpected sources, and that friendship and understanding can flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. The frontier could be a harsh and lonely place, but it could also be a place where prejudices were overcome, where different peoples could learn from each other, and where simple human kindness could change the course of history. The child I sheltered had indeed brought me visitors who became family, teachers, and lifelong friends. The end. Legal disclaimer. This story is completely fictional and was created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental.